Hell, Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Star Stuff Podcast, where we talk all things Star Wars. My name is Colin.
I'm Hannah.
And I am really excited about clones.
Yes, and that is Hunter. We are back. We'll definitely talk about Dragon Con at a later date because that's a whole other episode. But that was our group spent like 5 days together, which and where we were just kind of filled with Star Wars pretty much the entire time. It was so much fun.
But we have more pressing matters to talk about. Right
Yes. Yes, we do. Basically, so if you haven't seen the newest episode, you probably shouldn't be watching this current episode that we're talking about right now. But basically, spoiler alert, live action Clone Wars. That's pretty much what of what this episode was. I fell in love with Star Wars all over again. I laughed, I cried. It was amazing. What were the thoughts going through you guys' head when, like, oh my God, it's like Captain Rex, it's like, on the Battle of Death, like what?
Yeah, I mean, basically the same thing that you said. And we were just talking about this before the show. That episode was the culmination of 11 seasons of animated Star Wars over 15 years that tied everything into the original trilogy and the prequels just beautifully. I mean, the way that episode set everything up, like the writing for it, the acting for it, everything was absolutely incredible. This is why you got to pay your actors and writers so they can do cool stuff like this.
Absolutely.
So, shout out to all the people that worked on this. They deserve the highest praise for everything that they did. But I mean, yeah, that was kind of like what you said. It fell in love with Star Wars all over again. It was just like beat after beat of like, no way.
Yeah.
So my mind was blown for the whole 40 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, no, I was like, I don't need pre-workout today. Star Wars is my pre-workout. Like I was just like I was like, wow, like it's so overwhelming of just, and this really shows you how great Star Wars can be. And this also proves that Dave Filoni's movie coming out in a couple of years is going to be amazing. Because this was all Dave Filoni. Like, if you watch the credits after this episode, it's Dave Filoni. Like, this whole episode was like his baby, and it makes sense why.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, man. So let's break it down. Did you guys like the length of this episode?
I did. Yeah. I was actually, dude, the things like my heart and brain went through during that episode, it was like watching it, it felt like super long, but also super short. And I think there's probably like 10 minutes left. And I was like, geez, this feels like it's been a full length movie. And then I was like, oh, it's only been a half hour. But at the same time, like it felt quick, so.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So some people got to see it at the theater and honestly, I think a lot of people know how I feel about this, but Star Wars began on the big screen, so I was excited for when they announced it, but this felt like a movie of just even watching it in your own home.
And I mean, not all of the shows that we see, or not all the episodes of all the shows that we see do feel that way. Like they belong on the big screen. I mean, it's always cool to watch them on the big screen, but the way everything is like shot and portrayed and all that, like it lends itself to seeing it in a massive format in front of you.
Yeah. It was done so well, but the episode opens up with some of the crew just kind of wondering what's happening. And I love Jason's connection to the Force, to where
Yeah.
he like hears the lightsaber fights like through the waves, and
Yeah,
then
that was
Hera-
interesting.
Yeah, that was cool.
And I think this kind of goes back to what Brooke was saying a while ago for us, because of her point of view is it doesn't make sense to have Sabine as Ahsoka's apprentice, and
Right.
and it's because, you know, she's like, Sabine's not Force sensitive, but this episode proves that, you know, Hera's not Force sensitive. Hera's technically not Force sensitive, but the Force moves through us.
My thing with that, like, I think it's also the planet. I think Jason probably noticed it first because he is Force sensitive. And even though Hera's not Force sensitive, like the Night Sister, like you look at Dathomir,
yeah,
it's not like just any old planet. Like that planet has like a very deep tie, like connection to their magic. And I don't think they would put something like I'm forgetting what like the map area was called, but I don't think they would put something like that somewhere that wasn't connected to the Force in a really deep way.
Right.
And she really had to try. Like Jason was just kind of sitting there, and he was like, "Oh hey," I mean, obviously it's a little deeper than that, but like more or less. And she had to really focus and get to that point. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we're jumping the gun, but the fact that they also did mention Kanan too was great.
Yeah.
I loved that. Yeah. And I felt like Carson was kind of like the audience that really isn't, you know, that really didn't watch Rebels and stuff, of where it's explained to him of who Kanan was and everything, and then Carson is just like, cool.
Yeah, he's like,
what
the hell's going on, guys?
Right.
And then they explain it, and he's still like, I don't know what that means. What the hell's going on?
Right. And he's just there, but he's also owning like every scene that he's in, and I love it. He feels like the Phil Coulson of the Star Wars universe.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah. So we then kind of go back to where we left off from episode 4. After they kind of start to investigate of what happened to Ahsoka and Sabine, and we kind of learn that Ahsoka is technically in the world between worlds, but it's pretty much purgatory. So she's on the verge of death, and this is kind of happening in her head, but also it's like she's kind of in the spirit realm. So it makes sense that Anakin is there. That's my take from it. What do you guys think about that? Like, do you think that she is in that kind of like world? I mean, and it makes sense why it's world between worlds, but do you think that she's, you know, that she was actually dying, or do you think it was like a Force vision? Like, what do you actually think that was happening there?
I mean, I think it was really heavily implied that this was a near-death experience for her. So she is like on the edge of like experience, or like moving on to a different part of the Force beyond like the living realm. But at the same time, like that's kind of what the episode itself seemed to indicate to me. But at the same time, that raises a lot more questions as far as like Anakin and what he was doing there, and if that's actually Anakin, or if it was just a manifestation of like a vision or something Ahsoka was having, or if it was really Anakin through the Force. I don't know. There's a lot of questions. I don't know if we're gonna get answers here in this season, or what, or ever, or who knows. But
yeah, I'm hoping that we get. I mean, I think there's a chance that we might get a other look at the world between worlds, and we might see Hayden again. That's also a big rumor too, that this wasn't the only stuff that he shot, and there's also a trailer that came out a while ago that had lines that we didn't that we didn't hear in this episode.
Mm.
So my suspicion is that we might see him again. And that might just be the selfish side of me, just because of how great it was to see everything that we got. But yeah, seeing the force sensitive side of Jason was amazing, and I love how it kind of pulled in Hera and this whole episode really kind of it built more on the force aspect of Star Wars, and it taught us more about the force. It really opened up a lot of answers that we've had in the past and questions. Because my biggest thing was, how are they going to explain that Ahsoka got into the world between worlds? Like, how does that make sense?
Right. And that's sort of what I was talking about too. Like, you hear like near-death experience stories from the real world, and it's like obviously like something that someone doesn't fit, like their body doesn't physically experience that. It's all like mental or like an out-of-body experience or whatever.
Yeah.
So, also the fact that like they found her still floating in the ocean. To me, I don't think any of this happened with her physical form. Like, this was her somehow being manifested like in that realm.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that, just because it's the force is very interesting and we keep getting more kind of lore to it. But if someone's going to make like something like this make sense, it's going to be Dave Filoni. And I remember when they introduced this kind of stuff in Rebels, and I knew this was just kind of Dave Filoni channeling his inner George Lucas, because this does seem like George Lucas. It seems like this is something that he would have dived into.
Yeah. This feels like an out there George idea.
Yes. But it works, though. It's weird and it works. This whole episode was a bunch of the weird sides of Star Wars. And I think that's what a lot of the fans love. And I think that's why we all really loved this episode. Because it did bring a bunch of stuff that from our, for most of us, our childhood. And what was your reaction? Like, as soon as you saw Ahsoka standing there, and then you saw the Phase 1 clone troopers like passing by?
I'd lost my mind. I mean, I know we're not really supposed to swear on this podcast much, but you know what I'm thinking.
Oh man.
And the pink, immediately that keyed me into Teth.
Yes.
And I guess it wasn't really confirmed. They said it was like one of their first missions, or their first mission of the Clone Wars or whatever.
Yeah.
So I assume that it's actually Teth, and like the ground kind of looked like Teth and stuff. And if you look back at the Clone Wars movie too, Rex is the only individualized paint job that we see. All the other clones on Teth, there's some with the blue stripes, but most are just grunts and stuff. And then there's some ARF troopers and stuff, but the paint jobs on the clones fit with that too. So it all points to that. I lost my mind.
Oh man. I just remember of like, I felt like it was an out of body experience, to where like I was transported like to back where I was a kid, and I was just sitting there and I was like, ooh, this is Star Wars, but it's new. And it felt like that all over again. And people don't understand like how great like of how big of a challenge of doing this was. And for Hayden, I think he did such a great job of tying in his version of Anakin and Matt Lantern's version of Anakin.
Yeah.
And you can feel a difference in his performance too. And I think it's meant to reflect like Anakin's coming of age, because he's obviously like he grows as a person throughout the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith. And his performance in the World Between Worlds, he has that like much more mature weight to what he says, and like you like see it in his eyes almost.
Yes.
And then you like in these, I don't know if you call them visions or flashbacks or whatever Ahsoka's having, that this manifestation of Anakin gets brought into before it, like there's points where it breaks from it being Anakin of her memory into Anakin as that manifestation from the world between worlds, like teaching her. And you can tell that difference just in the way that he acts and talks.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of like a version of Avatar The Last Airbender, how he can like do that meditating thing and like walk in the spirit realm.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of that, because it's like it's like her older self is inside her younger body experiencing these memories again. And like I feel like it's the same thing like with Anakin. It's like that force ghost in the world between worlds where like they all kind of are, right? And he is like going through these with her, because obviously she didn't stand there and she wasn't like, this is the Clone Wars, like when she originally was going through this in real time, but like her then, and then Anakin is like responding how he would then, but also like, I don't know if I'm explaining.
No, I get what
like,
you're trying to say.
Yeah.
It's
like a time loop type.
Yeah, like going through something again, and he's responding how he would have if she said that at that time.
Yes.
So it's like kind of like that tie-in of like Avatar The Last Airbender, almost like a spirit realm going on a journey type thing.
Yeah.
I feel like is kind of the vibe I got from it. So it's not like her physical body, like Hunter said earlier, but like she's still going through it and everything feels real and everything is like happening around her.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And something else that carries over in this episode is what Dave Filoni tries to do in almost every episode of the Clone Wars or any show that he does, is that there's always a lesson. And this lesson is for us. Well, in my eyes, which I would love to hear of what you guys have to say about this, but in my eyes, I think the lesson here is Ahsoka letting go of the past and just kind of embracing what happened, but also embracing all the good things that happened along the way and all the good life lessons that helped her help out other people in her near future. And I think she can't let go of in her mind, the legacy of what Anakin became, which was Vader. And she can't let that go. And I think this was the episode of where Ahsoka finally lets go of the hatred that Anakin turned into Vader. I think that was the big lesson in my eyes, is just her letting go that Anakin became Vader and kind of moving on from that.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Josh.
Do you know why we're doing that again? Like, the only thing that I would say is that would annoy me if that's the fact. I'm like, that's the second time it's happened in live action, because I feel like the Kenobi way of doing that was better. The whole letting go of, sorry that I turned into Vader. The only thing is, I would say it's kind of interesting to me that we've seen her in like the animated series having to deal with the whole like Anakin becoming Vader, and I feel like I kind of ditched him and didn't live up to that. But in this, I'm kind of like, the only time we've really seen it affect her is when Balin says, you left him, and because you left him, he became Vader.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, she reacted, but I wanted to see like more of her dealing with that.
I think Colin is partially right, but one of the things that really stood out to me, and I forget if it's in this first Teth vision or in the Siege of Mandalore one, I think it's this first one. Anakin makes a remark about like, oh, do you even want a Padawan? Like, teaching isn't all it's cracked up to be. And like, she kind of pauses for a second, and you can see her like thinking about that. And obviously she has current like experiences with that with Sabine. And I think this is really going to change how she treats Sabine or approaches training someone like Jason going forward. And I think that is closely related to the idea of her feeling partially responsible for Anakin or like connected to him in that way. And because I think part of her struggle with training Sabine is she feels like she has her faults and she doesn't want to push those into her Padawan because she is worried that Anakin did that to her. And I think the lesson here, and it's not like there's an overarching lesson in all of these moments, and like there's a reason that we saw the first mission on Teth, the last mission of the Clone Wars at the Siege of Mandalore, and then her fighting Anakin after. So the first one was with Anakin. She's like still obviously very dependent on him at that time. And then the next one at Siege of Mandalore, I think that's kind of why they had Rex be like, "Oh, nice job, Commander." And then like and that shows she's much more independent. And then Anakin comes in, and that's where there's this clash. And that shows that like she is different and she's not just an accrual of what Anakin has put into her. And then that carries forward when they're back in the World Between Worlds with that duel. And then it's the I choose to live line. Yeah. Like she's not going to let that memory of Anakin and fear of Anakin rubbing off on her. She's not going to let that fear kill her and change who she is.
Right.
She's choosing to just move on.
Yeah.
The other thing is that so there's Ahsoka, and then the other example would probably be Kanan and Cal Kestis, of where these three Jedi were not your standard, apprentices, because they learned during a time of war when, Obi-Wan and those other Jedi were, pretty much peacekeepers before the war began. So they weren't soldiers. They weren't fighting all the time. So the way that Ahsoka learned to be a Jedi was completely different than what your standard Jedi would learn. And that carries on to where, she takes up Sabine as her apprentice. And then she's just like, well, I mean, I only like really know how to teach someone like my master did. Like I'm kind of going off of what you were saying, where it's like she doesn't know how to do it, and she's afraid that if she does, then it's going to be that repeating pattern of what happened to Anakin. And this episode was just kind of her trying to break that cycle. And when she does, it's which I'll get to that in a second, because her transformation is incredible, like and in the later part of this episode.
I think like a big thing too is like you see so much of her, like, because obviously this is like current her and little her's body, however you want to say that, but she was so young when all of this happened, and you see how much guilt and how much weight she's carried for all of the people she feels like she killed, all the clones she feels like she killed. Yeah. Like all of the stuff that she was going through at, how old was she when the Siege of Mandalore happened? Like
14? 17?
Yeah.
Somewhere like later teens.
Late teens. Yeah.
Like you think about the things that people end up doing or feeling because they go through trauma at a young age in the real world. Like I would say she's doing pretty well. But like, I think the reason she was like so cold and so a little bit more condescending, like you don't see as much of her like spunkiness per se in the other episodes, is because of a lot of that guilt and a lot of the weight that she like just never let go of. Like, again, letting go. There's a recurring theme, but I think you see her at the end of the episode with a little bit more of that back. Like how she's like, goes on the outside of the ship and she's like got all these like little like smirks and things. And I think I know for me and like some other people, seeing her in live action like you're like, oh my god, she's so tiny, like she's so young, and I feel like that really just that's something that she's clearly carried for so long, and she's just so small when she's going through literally war. She's running through all of this. At what age is she in this scene? Like 12?
Yeah, Teth would
maybe
be like 12 or 13 or something.
Like,
yeah.
Think about like a little kid in the real world running through that in, I'm sure, some part of the world, and you're like horrified.
Mm-hmm.
And like same thing here, but you don't think about it because we've only seen her as like an animated. She looks older animated than she does here. Like, I think you see her have to let go of a lot of that too.
I think
move past it.
The letting go thing, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean,
100%.
The moment on Teth when she's sitting with the clone on the stretcher, and she, like, you can see that grief in her face, and she talks about it with Anakin and that regret and feeling of responsibility. And then she does literally let go of that clone's hand as she gets up and walks away.
Which kind of straying away from the story and kind of focusing on like of that in particular, we didn't see any of the clones' faces, which was very interesting.
No, I just don't think they wanted to pay to fly Tem up from New Zealand.
Well,
which sucks.
Yeah,
they were also filming at the end of like COVID, right?
I forget when this one was filmed.
They were filming in 2022.
I feel like they were at Celebration and they were talking about how they couldn't come because they were filming.
Maybe.
Right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
We were there in California for something.
Yeah.
Celebration.
But and that is a bummer, but I really don't feel like it impacted any of the portrayals at all.
No.
I think the fact that one clone that she was holding was faceless too, like despite that they all look the same, to her, they were all very different. She was around them like 24/7. So to her, like they're all different people, even if they have the same face. So I think that her holding the hand of a clone's face who is covered, it's like it doesn't matter who it was or if she was in charge of them, whatever, or if she was close with them like she is with Rex, like she still feels the same weight and guilt. And I think that kind of says something.
Again, Hannah, damn, like that was like a perfect description.
Yeah,
like,
get a therapist on this podcast and get the deep insights.
I read and write a lot of books and did a lot of that in college, so I feel like that's also lending itself to insights, but
yeah, well, I mean, and kind of seeing it from her perspective also helps you understand the character. So, that is a great description of what's happening in the scene. So for me, when I saw the Clone Wars, now we're kind of going to the part where it's like, oh my gosh, wow. Seeing Anakin in the Clone Wars armor, I was dying. I was so happy. Oh my God.
I think we're going to kind of get into this now because I know you started to mention like Ahsoka's change after she comes out of this.
Yes.
You got to talk about just seeing this and seeing Clone Wars for real. And like for you,
so crazy.
It's Anakin. Like,
oh my God.
Anakin's your guy.
Yes.
And like for me, like Rex is my guy. So it's the same kind of thing. Like I initially saw the Phase 1 Rex in the background in this scene, and I was like, no, they can't tease me like that. They can't just keep him blurred in the background. And then we never really got a clear shot of Phase 1 Rex. Is like, oh, I mean, I guess it's better than nothing, but I'm still bummed we didn't see him. And then the next flashback, it's first just Ahsoka, and Rex runs by in the background like, oh.
Yeah.
And then he comes into frame, and they focus on him, and I lost my freaking mind.
So I was also at that point too. I was worried when we just saw the Phase 1 Rex. I was just like, okay, is that it? Is that all we get? Yeah. Like, come on. And I'm glad that Tamara did actually do like
Yes,
the
it
voice
was
of the
perfect.
clones. Yeah. Now I did hear a rumor that that phase 1 shot of Rex was the phase 1 armor, but the clone helmet, they just added the fin, and that was so the phase 1 helmet actually was a phase 2, was a phase 2 helmet, but unless you zoomed in, I don't think that's true, but I heard that and I was like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't see that being the case. Like, it's less work to have a costume department paint up one of the phase 1 casts that they have for all these other clones that we're seeing than it is to pay a digital artist to go in and like roto the helmet in every frame, replace it, because you gotta, if you're doing that, you gotta go in, you have to have a lighting map. You have to have some sort of tracking of the spatial placement of the characters to be able to like replace that helmet model and then have it move with the camera and everything. So it doesn't make any sense for them to have done it that way, to have like just augment a helmet like that.
Yeah, I couldn't really wrap my head around that because it was just more than one like channel saying it, and I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. So I was like, oh, okay. But Josh, you've been very quiet. What was your reaction of when you saw like of pretty much live action Clone Wars happening like in front of your eyes?
It's cool for me, but it's sad in the sense that if you have not watched it, you won't get it.
Yeah.
Like, my thing is always been that Star Wars is for everyone, but I think this was the turning episode for me where it became not for everyone. That the only time you're going to get the full like gravity of any of the situation is if you like the Clone Wars. If you were in the Clone Wars, you watched the show and you kept up with it. And I understand, like, a lot of people were like, yeah, but this will get people to want to go ahead and watch the Clone Wars. It's an animated show, and I know that is a giant barrier for people into actually watching other Star Wars where they only watch live action. I don't feel like, personally, this episode, besides being for people who love Clone Wars, I'm like, everything that happens in the world between worlds, like I don't, it's not that much of a gravity thing.
I'm gonna agree with you, but also partially challenge that. So like last night I watched this episode with my dad, and he has seen like bits and pieces of the Clone Wars, but like it's not his shtick, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he likes to sit down in a theater or like watch an actual live action movie or do whatever. And in talking with like him or talking to other people who either haven't watched Rebels or haven't watched Clone Wars or Rebels, this episode has way more impact if you've seen it. But I think all of the stuff that Hannah just said about, like, you see that she's like a kid at this stage and she's going through some brutal stuff.
Yeah.
And you can like just tell from the awesome acting and writing, again, shout out to those people, that like there is gravity here, and like it's a learning experience and a point of development for Ahsoka.
It's almost like the Clone Wars and Rebel stuff is like Easter eggs for people who don't or haven't watched any of that. So like, I agree, like the impact of everything that all of us Star Wars fans went through is not going to hit them the same way. But I think understanding the actual story there, like seeing her with Anakin, and obviously if you're watching this, you've seen Star Wars, probably, like you've watched the movie. I don't know why
I would hope so.
Into this show, but like I think that for people who haven't watched those, that's fair. And like, because I didn't actually watch Clone Wars until 2 years ago, because like I didn't have anyone who was as into Star Wars. Like I've always loved Star Wars, but I didn't have anyone that like was like, hey, watch this show with me or something. And then like I didn't even know that it was like a good thing until I met Hunter. So
you're welcome. Just gonna put that out there. You're welcome.
So like I feel like for me, like this had a ginormous impact, but obviously I also didn't grow up with it. So I feel like I can almost speak to both sides, but like obviously 2 years is a pretty long time. Like I've watched the Clone Wars twice now, and like I loved it the first time. I think I shocked Hunter by watching the whole thing instead of just certain episodes. Yeah, I was like, it's so good. How do you not watch all of it? But, so I think like it's very true. Like it's not gonna hit you the same, but the actual story part gets across.
And I don't think they lost sight of that either.
Yeah.
Just based off of what they said. Like some of it was almost a little too on the nose for me. Like Ahsoka saying, "This is the Clone Wars." And us we're like
oh my gosh, it is.
No way. And then like they specifically say, this is our first mission of the Clone Wars.
Yeah. And
then when they're at Siege of Mandalore, she's like, we weren't here together at this point.
Yeah.
And like they kind of explain why these battles are different. They're not just a battle. They are a battle of significance at different points in her life. Yeah. And I think they do a good job conveying that.
I think the writers did a good job. Again, the writers. I think the writers did a good job like putting in the information in a way that they would communicate with each other so that other people kind of know what's going on. So Anakin being like, oh, I don't remember this one. She's like, well, yeah, because we were separated at this point. And obviously he remembers that and we know that. So then other people can kind of like get that gist.
Right.
You know? So I feel like they did a good job of putting it in without like, I don't know. They just did it well.
I also think that as great as it was to have these scenes, to me, it didn't feel forced. Like Dave Filoni knew that this is what fans wanted, but he had to have a reason in order to do the flashbacks. Because I remember watching Book of Boba Fett, and it was like, boom, here's a flashback. He's taking a nap. You know, this is happening, right? So
what a flashback, taking a nap.
Yeah, right. So, but in this
show,
what
sums up that show?
Yeah. So in this episode, it wasn't just to be like, I mean, I know a lot of people think, oh, like they just added the Clone Wars stuff to make the Clone Wars people happy. To me, it fit into the story. There was a reason behind it. And it's because Dave Filoni, as big of a Star Wars fan he is, he loves kind of giving people life lessons. He is a walking fortune cookie. We know this because every episode of the Clone Wars comes with some type of like corny line for that looks like it's from a fortune cookie, but at the same time, it's just like, you know, that's actually good advice. And that's what this whole episode was. It was a life lesson. So it made sense to have
this episode was Ahsoka's blue text.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I also love how when they jump back and forth from the flashback Force visions and Hera and her crew are trying to find like Ahsoka and everything. And you have Huang and Hera kind of talking about, you know, like Ahsoka and everything. And then Hera's like, what was Anakin like? And then he's just like, intense. And it's just like, that's one great way to kind of sum it up. But yeah. Yeah. But seeing Anakin come back in his full glory was just incredible. And I can't believe that we got the Siege of Mandalore. I can't believe we got Phase 2 Captain Rex. I remember watching this like the third time, and I looked at it and I was like, I can't believe what I'm looking at. But also
turned off this episode and immediately went to my computer.
He literally just got up and left.
Yeah, I just got up and left and went to my laptop and I went to this scene. It was like screenshot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, I know right where he is.
Well, and that's something that Craig and I and Brooke were talking about as well. When we see Ahsoka, like of where she has her white outfit, Craig was like, I guarantee you someone is already a Hobby Lobby or somewhere that has already started to buy the materials to go and make that costume.
For sure.
Yeah. But one of the first things that popped in my head when I saw the phase 2 like of Captain Rex was, damn, he's built like he is like fit in that outfit, and his shoulder pads are kind of lifting up too, so that threw me off a tiny bit. But also, again, jumping from animation to live action is kind of a challenge. But he looked great.
It's interesting to me because this was like this whole episode in the World Between Worlds. I don't know how much of it was exactly necessary, because I feel like if we didn't have all these scenes, right, and we only had maybe like Ahsoka talking to Anakin for a little bit and then she came back, like I don't think anything is lost to the average viewer. This is yeah, like I feel like if it was only Ahsoka and Anakin talking for a little bit and then she chooses to live, that same whole speech, you could have made it like less than 10 minutes of a conversation and then boom, we're back to the episode. But this was like a big chunk dedicated to like, yeah, you watch the Clone Wars, you know what's up. Here we go. We're going to give this whole thing. And we hope that like people who haven't watched the Clone Wars can join in. The only thing is this is only 8 episodes. And I feel like some of the plot threads that we've had from the beginning are kind of going towards the end. And I kind of want to see, like, I'm like, how much time do we have for Thrawn? How much time do we have for Balin's story? How much time do we have for what happens to Sabine and Ezra? And is Sabine going to be like trained properly? Like all this kind of stuff. I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know if we're going to have enough time.
I don't think we're going to get all those answers this season.
I feel like I didn't expect to. Like,
yeah.
And I'm going to like, from someone who like reads and writes a lot, I can agree that like you could have had, especially for like a normal audience, like going back to everything we just said, like who haven't watched everything that we all have, like they could have done that. And then we could have gotten to other stuff. Like that's totally very fair. But from my other perspective, I think this gives a lot more depth and meaning, even to people who haven't watched this, because like I said before, like we got really excited for certain reasons, but like average people can understand what's going on, and I think this gives a lot more depth because average people don't actually know who Ahsoka is. Like they saw her pop up in
good point.
The Mandalorian.
I hadn't really thought
they
about it.
They see her angle. Like if I hadn't watched the Clone Wars, I'd be like, who is this? Like why should I care about her? But I think that this also gives a lot of depth. Like, I agree. She could have just, like, they could have just, like, made it, like, a 2-minute whatever thing. But I think that there's so much more depth to her for people to care about her. Because, like, we know that she was his Padawan from, like, the little bits of other shows, whatever, this one and this one, that they've said. And like, but people will probably be like, okay, well then where was she in the movies? And then this gives answers and I don't know, more depth to her character, I think.
Yeah, the fact that they did spend so much time on it, I think kind of like it emphasizes that regardless of like what was going on here, like even if they made a longer conversation with Anakin, I think the fact that they spend time on it emphasizes it to an extent as well. And I do want to say, Josh, like I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying. I'm agreeing with it. There are some things that I'm like challenging a little bit. Like I said, I think they were aware of it when they did this, even though this was obviously something they didn't have to do. They were aware of it and they tried to make it work, which I think they did. But they tried to make it digestible to like a casual viewer as well as a longtime fan.
I think the only point that I would raise to that is that if you go back to the original trilogy, could you have this exact same scene but with Luke? Or would you much rather have short scenes of him talking with Obi-Wan? Or would you rather have like a scene of him just talking with Anakin where it's them in their Force ghosts rather than them going through different scenes like this? Because personally, I think short and sweet is better for me, personally.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally valid, like, personal take on it. For me, like, even watching Star Wars growing up, Obi-Wan's line of, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars, or other lines like that you get in Star Wars that imply there's something else that makes what was just said matter, or like what you're seeing matter because of like some backstory. It implies that there's more there. And me personally, like, I like that. I like when Star Wars implies a purpose and then we get some of that too in whatever form factor. And I think it's a totally valid way to feel one way or the other.
Yeah.
And like I said, I just watched this episode with my dad last night, and I feel like he would probably agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Star Wars. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to make something as big as Star Wars only for a casual viewer. Because you think about Star Wars, Marvel, DC, Star Trek, like some of the really big things that are out there, like, they have so much depth to them because of all the history behind them. And I mean, Star Wars is like, we're filling in gaps. Like you said, like Obi-Wan says Clone Wars. And at that time, everyone's like, what the heck is a Clone War? Like, and now we know what it is. So I feel like it's hard to make it just that, because then all of the people who have been invested in it are going to be like, we totally should have gone more in depth. So I agree, like, again, like what Hunter said, like, I totally get what you're saying too. Like, you could have made it shorter and we could have like gotten on with this. But I feel like it's hard for them to do it only one way, especially if it's more surface level.
I think I would have been like more okay with it if this season was 10 episodes instead of 8.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Because I've had this like clock in the back of my head, like, all right, we need to keep going because of what happened with Obi-Wan. And it only being like 6 episodes, I was like, all right, I want to see where this is going.
Yes. You don't want to wait for a season 2. Like,
I'm glad that this is happening in an Ahsoka show, though. Like, I wouldn't want this happening like in any, like, this is Ahsoka show, and I like that this whole thing is happening here. But if this popped up in another show, I would have been like, get out of my show.
Did you not like the Mandalorian taking over the Book of Boba Fett? Was that not your favorite thing?
The sad thing is that was my favorite part of the Book of Boba Fett.
I know.
As a diehard Boba Fett fan, that was my favorite part of that show.
Yeah.
But to Josh's point, like, I loved the Kelleran Beck flashback with Grogu in The Mandalorian, but even that was like pushing it for me a little bit. And like, I liked it, and I'm not unhappy that it was there by any means, but like, it was pushing it to the point where it's like, this doesn't feel like it should be in The Mandalorian show, you know?
Interesting.
But this feels very, very appropriate for an Ahsoka show.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, to me, I'm justifying it, like, not because, I'm a Clone Wars fan, but because it makes sense. Like, everything that's happening here is like the lesson. And I think Dave Filoni kind of found that fine line of, of fan service, but also, there's a reason for it.
And that also because this is going to be the last show for a while. Like,
well, we've got Skeleton Crew, we've got Acolyte, we've got Andor
for a while. Like, it's not it got pushed back for all the other ones. Like, if it was back to back at like November of when we thought that Skeleton Crew was coming out, I'd have been like, awesome. Yeah. But this is like the last Star Wars for a solid like almost 6 months. So I'm like, that's a half of a year I'm waiting until the next.
It is so wild that we are talking about that like it's a long time.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like, because like I said before, like I read a lot, and there's a lot of series that I wait for like 2 years for a book. So I totally understand wanting something to like just happen, or to like waiting for the next thing is just, it feels like forever, especially because like you like almost like grieve when it's over. You're like, what the heck am I supposed to do every Tuesday night now? Like, I had all of this happiness and serotonin every Tuesday, and then now you're like, this thing that you love is like, it's gone for however many months until the next Star Wars thing or the next Ahsoka season. I'm assuming that they will do a second one. I knew from the beginning they wouldn't be able to cram everything into one season. So,
well, here's my theory: is that I think that if the show ends on a kind of sad note, that it's gonna lead into the Dave Filoni movie that he's gonna be making,
because they stopped production. They're not going to do another season of Mandalorian. It's going to end with the Dave Filoni movie.
Yeah.
So
I thought they were, but there's one more season before that, right?
I thought
potentially. So again, there's a lot of things happening in the air right now, especially with the strike happening. That's not
right.
Yeah, studios pay your actors and writers so we can get more cool stuff.
Yep.
And they can live, like that's important too, to have a living wage.
We like to be able to eat food and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So good.
But basically there's a lot of things up in the air. For example, what Josh was saying was we were supposed to get Skeleton Crew this November, but because of everything going on, that got pushed back. And next year, some things might not even happen, because next year the lineup was Acolyte, Andor season 2, Bad Batch season 3, Tales of the Jedi season 2. All that was going to be happening next year, and now things might get pushed back even further. So season 4 has been written. Jon Favreau did say that the plot and script and everything is there. But things change all the time. So who knows what's exactly is going to happen. It's not concrete, but there is a chance that season 4 may happen.
I think something that scares me is that if people think that, like, for me, I want, this could be like her only season of the show, and then we see her again in the movie, or she pops up in different places. I would be okay with that, because I don't want them to force anything and continue a series that should have ended. Like, for me, Mandalorian could have ended at season 2 of The Mandalorian and not have Grogu come back, because then we got 3, and that ending is not nearly as good as 2 was. So
I think it would have been better if Grogu was still with Luke, but that's a discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
For not an Ahsoka centric podcast.
Yeah.
Did you not like the Looney Tunes ending in season 3, where like just kind of whoop?
I did find that hilarious. Like, I like goofy Star Wars,
but I didn't like that they just copy and pasted that and put that in Dial of Destiny for Indiana Jones. I was like, you can't do that twice. I know you're the same studio, but you can't do that twice in the same year, man. Like, come on. But yeah. Oh man.
Anyway.
Now, yes. Yes. All of the new Anakin close-ups I'm in love with, because I can do the scar a lot better now, and he looks great. Hayden looks great, and of just every scene that he's in, he just channels the Clone Wars version mixed with his version, and he just does it in such a fantastic way. And I can't get over it. I can't get over how flawless it was, and how him being there didn't feel like, hey, let's have Hayden Christensen come back for a cameo. It felt like he was meant to be there. There was a reason why. And it wasn't just to have a cameo to have a cameo. Like, he was there for a purpose, and this purpose was, again, fulfilling his destiny of being a Jedi Master and finishing her training. And I just, it all just blended in so well.
Yeah.
Now the whole Sith thing of where he turns on the red lightsaber and everything, how do you guys feel about that? Were you guys like, oh, like, that makes sense? Or were you like, holy crap?
I was kind of that's what makes me question, like, if this is just a manifestation of Anakin in Ahsoka's head, or if it's actually like Anakin as his, I don't know, Force ghost essence or whatever. Like if it's really Anakin perpetuating this, or if it was Ahsoka perpetuating this happening in her mind, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So I feel like, because someone else had said it earlier and I had a similar idea. Someone like that made a comment about him being like the ghost of Christmas past. So it's,
yes.
I feel like kind of, so how he's like flipping between, Clone Wars Anakin and, basically Vader. I mean, that literally is like a flash that happens a couple times. I feel like it's him. There's so many layers to it. So I'll say it's him, obviously the Siege of Mandalore is when it happens. And I think that that's significant, obviously, because that's the same time, right? That he turns. And I think that he's also playing on her guilt that she could have done something, and playing on her emotions to teach her a lesson. I think that he knows what triggers her because, they say like, oh, the Force ghosts, like, see everything that's going on. And I think that he's not messing with her, but teaching her a lesson based off of what she feels guilty and can't let go of.
Yeah. And the scene of where they kind of leave Mandalore and then he walks through and it flashes like of where he's Anakin, but then like Darth Vader and Anakin.
That was so beautiful.
I think one of my favorite details about that is when he's like, you lack conviction. It's not just Hayden talking. They blended in like Vader's like voice with his voice. So it was a mix of James Earl Jones and Hayden like talking at the same time. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like what?
Yeah.
Oh man, it was so cool.
So many layers to that. Again, I feel like I could have a whole episode of just talking about all the different layers of these. Like as someone who like writes and reads a lot, I feel like those flashbacks and everything like just made me so excited, on top of why everyone's excited.
And then also during this scene right here, like as she puts her blade closer to Anakin, you actually see her eyes turn yellow. And this is something that Brooke and Craig and I had to kind of go and rewatch. Yeah,
I didn't know if it was actually her eyes turning yellow or it was just that the lightsaber was red.
I thought that too, but as soon as I leaned in, you could definitely see the like, kind of Sith eyes, but then she tosses it, kind of echoing what happened to Luke when he was fighting Vader in Return of the Jedi, of where he was about to, take out his dad. And then he's like, no, I'm a Jedi like my father before me. And Ahsoka tossing the lightsaber and where she's just like, yeah, I choose to live. That was just like oh my God. Yes.
The dark side is not living.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw someone say earlier too that like she is more like Anakin than either she may want to admit, or maybe some people want to admit, like how similar they are. So I think that like seeing him turn and like all the things that she went through helped her stay more, you could say, in the middle, on the light side, whatever. But I think that really influenced her. And I think that she was maybe even scared at some points that she could turn into that because of how similar they were. I mean, they made comments about that during the Clone Wars series.
Yeah.
About how similar they are.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing to be compared
well,
to.
And I think that's why during Rebels, she wants to keep Anakin secret, but also I think she's kind of ashamed of just everything that went down. And then you go to season 7 and you see that there's a moment of where which it's a scene directly out of the movie, out of Revenge of the Sith, but but it's from her point of view of where Mace Windu's like, I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi. And of that scene, and then at the end of where Yoda was like, hey, Ahsoka, is there anything that you want to pass on to Anakin? And she's like, no, I'm good. Like, I think she feels guilty, and I think she feels ashamed, and maybe she thinks that things could have played out differently.
Yeah.
And all these visions are kind of playing like the greatest hits, but also at the same time, it's kind of going back to, her fears and everything. Yeah. And then this is where Dave Filoni, being a big Lord of the Rings fan, plays in, because when she comes back,
Ahsoka the White.
Yes. And
love that outfit though.
Yeah, she looked awesome. And you can totally tell, like, when she comes back as Ahsoka the White. I mean, everyone's just going to start calling her that now.
Absolutely.
But, like, when she comes back, you can totally feel her whole demeanor change too.
Yes.
And one of my complaints with the first 4 episodes was that she didn't, and like I chalked it up to her like just being older. But I think it was like her, I don't know if you want to call her being like grumpy or closed off or whatever. I think that was intentionally turned up in those episodes to show how like much she pulled herself in because of that guilt that she felt. And for the rest of this episode, Hannah mentioned earlier, she's like smirking and joking and like,
yes,
it kind of feels like what we're used to before with Ahsoka.
And if you think about what happened to her after the Clone Wars, having to hide and having to suppress who she is. Like, I don't know, I've read most of the Ahsoka book, but grad school kind of, so I feel like her having to suppress all of that, she didn't get to talk to anyone about it. She didn't get to, let it out. She didn't get to figure out any of it. And I think that just built up in different ways over time. And, even all the stuff that happens to her in Rebels, like, it's almost like she got like a short break from war and then it happened again almost, So it's very interesting to see her like be like so closed off in certain ways, especially emotionally, because she like loved Anakin like a brother. So I think that really makes her like kind of like cold in the first 4 episodes. Yeah. And even if you see her like in The Mandalorian, like she's very like stone faced almost.
She is happier in The Mandalorian than she is in the first.
For sure. Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Because she sees Grogu and starts talking to him and then smiles and smirks at it.
Yes, for sure. And I think like there were like very small times in the first 4 episodes where you could see that, but like not as much as we do at the end of this one.
No. And because as soon as we like see Ahsoka like talking to the Purgles and everything, like I'm like that is Ahsoka right there. Like exactly. I felt the Clone Wars energy just kind of I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then this scene right here in particular, and I think Josh probably picked up on it right away. This is kind of a Jedi Fallen Order Easter egg to Cal Kestis, because Cal Kestis can do the Force Echo thing. There's only a few Jedi that can do it, and
for sure.
and the fact that Ahsoka was doing it was like, oh, okay, cool, because certain Jedi and certain Force sensitive beings have certain mutations, and this is one of those mutations that only a few people can have. So
speaking of mutations, it's really weird to see her without her headband.
I was thinking how like they did it well.
Put it back on.
Yeah, it it was so interesting to see that, and like I kind of almost giggled at it. Like it was like it felt like she was like naked in a way, like not in like a gross way, but like is like.
And there was something funky about it, like.
I don't know how you're gonna make that look any better. Honestly.
Yeah, right. No,
like, I don't know what. Like
no,
it looks
good. But
like when someone's not wearing their glasses and they look kind of like just different without them, you know? And it's like, whoa, that's funky.
Yeah.
And it was like you just said, Josh, like, what do you make that transition look like? I kind of forget if we see that with Shakti at all, but I feel like I remember kind of a more smooth, like, fade into the.
Yeah.
But
I think the only way, I think the only time that we see Ahsoka, there's only one other scene where she doesn't have like her headband thing, and that's when it's like the flashback episode, like it's just like a 5-second scene where Plo Koon is meeting Ahsoka for the first time, like as a baby, pretty much.
Yeah.
But other than that, that definitely threw me off, and I remember Brooke was like, "Oh, okay, yeah."
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no. I just thought this whole episode was just fantastic, and it felt like a movie. It honestly felt like a movie.
I do think it's interesting just because, like, I know we have to hop off soon, but like looking towards the end of the episode, seeing like the like new Republic and all of them, like how they're trying to control things super hard still. And just seeing how Hera is still, you know, she says once a rebel, always a rebel or something, right? I believe that's what she says, or she said along the same lines.
Yeah.
Like seeing those comparisons, I feel like you can see why, you know, everything happened again.
Very Empire.
Yes.
Obviously not like, to the same extreme, but feels Empire.
Like they're trying to control so hard that like they missed that whole, what was the planet that they went to like see what was going on? Hera and Ahsoka.
What?
Where they went to the like manufacturing place.
Like
they were so like, there's nothing there. We are all good, and then they don't like go check it again because they're so, I don't know, hyper focused on certain things that they let things slip under them.
To me, the way that they're acting is the reason why the First Order was to rise up, just because the fact that they were like, hey, we defeated the Empire, even though, you know, it's kind of there, but we defeated the Empire. Like there's peace, and we don't have to worry about anyone doing that again. And that's kind of their mindset of what we see in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, and now in Ahsoka. That's their main mindset. And
it's like, oh, that couldn't be happening again. We got it.
Right. And that kind of it kind of relates kind of to where in Harry Potter where they're like, oh, like Voldemort's not really coming back, and then he comes back, and you're just like,
and then like how could that happen? It's fine. Right. Yeah. And you see like they talk about it in The Princess and the Scoundrel book, like how like like we, you know, defeated Darth Vader, but what about all these other people? And they touch on that in Ahsoka, like all these people who served the Empire super loyally, like what's happening with them? Because obviously they're not just going to kill a ton of people. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see the politics of it for sure.
Yeah, and oh man, yeah, no, it's, and the thing that we were all kind of talking about as we got done watching it was, are we gonna go to the other galaxy in the next episode, or are we just gonna spend the whole episode in Coruscant?
We better go to the other planet.
It's like boom, it's Hera's trial, and then Hera's just trying to be like, no, it's fine. It would not be a Dave Filoni project if we didn't spend one episode just kind of talking about politics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man,
it'll be interesting either way, but not for the next one.
Yeah. Space Whales, Purgle. Yes. How do we feel about the whole? I mean, because so Josh, you really didn't watch Star Wars Rebels. You kind of skimmed through it. How did you feel about the whole Purgle thing?
I mean, it's a creature in Star Wars, and their history is cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
that kind of sums it up for me too. Like, I'm not,
Like, I don't know what you mean. Like, I mean, like, I know what they're capable of. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, because of some people who like didn't watch Rebels, I saw some of their reactions, and they're like, "Why are there space whales?" Like,
But they explained what they were in
yeah,
previous episodes in the show.
yeah, I know that, but like, it's oh, man, it's
They were so
It's-
cool though. I mean, that's just so cool. I would love to see that.
the whole
Can we have some
too.
of those?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that was sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm just trying to wrap my head around just everything still. We got live action Clone Wars, we got Lord of the Rings somehow in Star Wars, we got, giant space whales. And it felt like Star Wars. It really felt like classic Star Wars. Not saying that The Mandalorian and all the other live action shows weren't, but this really felt like it came from George Lucas. And it's because Dave Filoni worked with George Lucas and he just understands it so well. And I can't believe that we got this.
Yeah. It's definitely incredible. Maybe we'll watch it again tomorrow. Like, it was really good.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen in next week's episode? Do you think that we will go to Coruscant, or do you think that
I think we'll at least jump back and forth between Coruscant and what's happening with everybody else.
Okay.
Everything that's happened with everyone else is what I really care about in this show.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, can we please, like, I was waiting for like the end of the episode where it would be like, oh, and then it's kind of like a lead up because it's like, oh, we found Thrawn or something like that. Kept me tided over until the next episode. But I'm hoping that our whole reveal of Thrawn is not just some very end thing. If it is, I'm going to be very sad.
Yeah.
That's understandable. Like, maybe if we saw end of the next episode, at least, that would be...
Please.
That would be nice. Because I feel like, obviously, we didn't see Sabine or anything that's happening on that ship. So I feel like we got to go and see at least something while they're traveling to the other, literal galaxy. Like, I feel like we got to see something with them and see what's going on.
Yeah.
Can't leave her for 2 episodes.
Nope. And it might just be the big Clone Wars fan and just a big Anakin fan, but I really hope that they actually go into the world between worlds, like somehow Ezra is tied into it, so we see him again. But,
Yes. Oh, that would be so great.
Yeah.
We saw him again.
But hopefully we see some of that.
Yeah.
Next week.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're all open for.
Yeah. All right. Awesome.
Hop off.
Yeah.
But it was great talking tonight.
Yeah.
And
It was. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on.
You crushed it.
Yeah, honestly. All right.
Talk to you later, guys.
See ya.
So Josh, do you think that we will do you think that we're gonna go back into the world between worlds, or do you honestly think like boom, that's it?
I could have it in other parts of the series. In Star Wars, I think we should just finish it up and get back to our main story. Unless it plays a pivotal role in what comes next, then I don't feel like there's a need for it.
Okay. That's fair.
Like if someone's like, this is how we're going to get back, we're going to use the world between worlds. I'm like, cool. It's established. Awesome. Great. But if not, I'm kind of like, what's the point?
Yeah. I'm just curious on how they're going to make sense of the whole Ezra and Thrawn surviving thing. Like I'm just curious.
I am
how
too.
That's going to play into effect, because when we last saw them, the windows on the Star Destroyer were cracked open and they just went into hyperspace. And it's just like, there's only one person that we know that survived getting sucked into the vacuum of space, and that's Leia in The Last Jedi. But I don't think they would do that again with like Ezra and Thrawn. So I'm curious on how they're going to do it. And honestly, I think the World Between Worlds would be the best way to kind of make that make sense. Because if not, I don't want them to be like, oh, look, it's Thrawn and Ezra, and they don't explain why they survived. I really hope that they give an explanation on how they survived, if it's not the World Between Worlds. But to me, the logical thing is to do the World Between Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't think that Ahsoka's story, technically for me, is like the most exciting thing of the show. And I know a lot of people who have come onto the show also say the same thing. It's literally been just like anything to do with Balin and Shin. A lot of people are like, yeah, that's where I'm clicking right now. So I hope Ahsoka can do a 180 and become a more likable character in this season.
Yeah, I'm man, like there's so much to me, there's just so much ground to cover. And I know you were talking about that, like, we're slowly running out of time, but I think we will get there. And if it does kind of end on the hanger, on the
in 3 episodes.
Yes.
In 3 episodes.
I know. There is a lot of things balancing at the end of this episode. And that final episode, I'm just like, how is this gonna end? Like, I'm curious, I'm excited, but at the same time, like, I want to know, because it just stresses me out of just how much time we have left. And but at the same time, I think they did cover a decent amount of ground in this episode. I especially, this was a life-changing moment for Ahsoka, and you definitely see it at the end. Like, Ahsoka to me is Ahsoka again, and it's just incredible. And this was probably, to me, Rosario Dawson's like best and interpretation of the character. She did such a phenomenal job in this episode.
I think that it's not very well portrayed in the fact of what she's learning. Because even like last night, we had a whole bunch of viewers who had messaged in and said, I don't really understand. Like, it's way too smart what they were doing in there for me, or I don't really understand what the life lesson is. And I don't think there really is as big of a on the nose life lesson as there was for when Obi-Wan was talking to Anakin and like, hey, you can just let it go, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm kind of like, like I wish it was a better lesson or explained better for people, and including me, because like I still think that whatever she learned in there was kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
Like, what does I choose to live mean if you haven't seen her not choosing to live?
I think she was so. For Anakin, no. Well, no. I mean, that's a great question, but it's a loaded answer, because Anakin chose to be a Jedi, but he also chose to give in into those attachments. And Ahsoka, and you see those teachings from Anakin kind of pass on to her, of where she kind of struggles with that too. But going back to what Hannah said earlier, the whole episode is about her letting go, and she's been holding on to this guilt. She's been holding on.
What's the guilt? Of what?
She feels responsible
for Anakin becoming Vader. So we're getting the same thing twice. That's what I don't like. I'm like, can we not do this again? We've done this already, and we've done it better already. Please don't do this again.
I know, but it's like, I don't think that it would be good for the character to not, at least acknowledge.
That's why I think that it should have been like shorter. I would have loved not even her just going to the World Between Worlds, but her falling off the cliff into the water, and as she's there, she's helped up like onto the beach shore, and it's Anakin as a Force ghost to talk to her. And I would have loved that, in comparison to this, where I feel like it's far more cryptic, and then we go, look, you remember all this stuff? Yay! And I was like, okay, like I'm like, great, we're seeing stuff like if you like Clone Wars, that's amazing, but like I like Clone Wars, but I don't like the Clone Wars that much in comparison.
Yeah, same. Yeah, totally.
Like I feel I don't like how another thing that's becoming kind of scary for me is that we always have to have a Skywalker in a series to make the series good in their head. The only time, like, they keep on putting Skywalker stuff into series that don't need to be there.
Well, I mean, if you look at Andor, that's a fine
Andor
example.
is the only one.
Well, well, hang on. Yeah. Well, I mean, they were leaning there for a while of being like, you know, hey, this is the Skywalker saga. This is the Skywalker story. I think Andor is a fine example of you don't have to be a Skywalker in order to have your story told.
Mm-hmm.
And The Mandalorian was going that way too. And I kind of figured that we would end up seeing Luke and everything. And that ended up being the case. And we got that in the Book of Boba Fett. But let's face it, those last 3 episodes of Book of Boba were pretty much season 2.5 of Mando. And then you go into season 3, and we don't even deal like we don't have any connection to any of the Skywalkers, I believe, right? There's no connection there. That was like a Mandalorian story of season 3 of Mando.
Yeah, it is, but it's still brought up about like training for him, and it's my thing for it is that I think that we as all Star Wars fans should just drop this like Skywalker saga and go in a different direction, or if we're gonna stay in this time period, give us new characters. Most people will latch on to new characters rather than old ones. I can guarantee you that because even Balin and Shin have become like fan favorite characters. I think I had watched another YouTube video where they were talking about how Star Wars is the most unique in the fact that they can only just show you a character, and that character becomes immediately like everyone wants to know about it. Like people were making costumes for Kylo Ren before Kylo Ren had ever even hit the screen.
Yeah.
Why don't they do that more with the new characters? How Solo, a Star Wars story, could have been not Han Solo. And if it wasn't Han Solo, I think people would have been a lot more okay with it. Like if it wasn't, it was like a new character. I still think that probably would have done better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
like
towards the future, please let us just move away from Skywalker stuff and keep the stuff that's new. I love new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? And Skeleton Crew, you know, you might get that, you know, that crossover scene of Luke Skywalker being like, "Hey guys, I'm building my temple," and then he just kind of walks past the temple. I mean, because of that show is going to be happening during the Mando timeline, which that show I think is going to have the. To me, I feel like that show will kind of show the percussion, like of everything happening in Ahsoka will kind of carry on into that show of where, you know, Thrawn may be back, and that might be like kind of the word on the street when like the kids are doing their own adventure and they're like, "Oh, Thrawn, oh, interesting." Like I could see that happening. But I think you're right. I think staying away from, as much as I loved seeing Anakin in this, and this is really, really hard for me to say because I'm an Anakin Skywalker, like diehard fan, is that having more original characters is really what helps build the Star Wars lore. I don't mind building more to the characters that we already know, but at the same time, having new characters introduced into the Star Wars universe is what makes Star Wars so unique. Kind of going off what you were saying. If you go and watch the cantina scene in A New Hope, you have all those, you know, all those aliens there, right? But if you listen or read the book, A Certain Point of View, you've got so many chapters of just each individual person in that cantina, and some of those characters are on screen for like, you know, 2 seconds, but you get a whole story of why they're there and why everything is like connected. And it's just the small things like that makes Star Wars so phenomenal. And it brings in so many new fans, like of just being like, oh, who is that? Who's that green guy that has like the long, hair? And it's Kit Fisto, and he doesn't say any lines in any of the movies, but he's one of the coolest characters of all time. Like, it's the small things like that. And I think they need to introduce more. And I think that's what Skeleton Crew will do, because from the trailer that you and I saw,
looks good.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. So I'm excited to see where that goes. We have a question. When do we think Ahsoka dies? Where was she during the sequels? Well, I know the theory you guys talked about last week, which is something that I mentioned to David too, and I think I mentioned a while ago, was that it would make sense and if Ahsoka had her line that was in Rise of Skywalker happen in maybe the next episode, because that would explain why she was able to, kind of communicate. Because Dave Filoni did say when Rise of Skywalker comes out, just because you heard her voice doesn't mean that she's dead. So that's something that I was thinking that would make sense, but we don't know what's happening to her. We honestly don't know. What do you think?
I don't think she's dead as of yet. I wouldn't doubt that they're going to keep her alive for a long time. If not, then I feel like something that I will say that I would have loved is if we went back to the whole like Mortis thing, and in the world between worlds, like I wish they would have brought more of him being like the father.
Yeah.
I wish that, like, if this conversation has to be done in the world between worlds, have him be the father, have Ahsoka be like the sister. I don't know who's going to be the brother as of yet, but I still feel like that could have been something more important in my head.
Yeah.
I don't think that she is going to necessarily like die in a sense of like I was fighting this thing, but I wouldn't doubt that she becomes like something with the Force that is like, whether that's the light side of the Force, I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah. I would also love to. So to me, I think one great thing would be that to have Hayden come back as Anakin, like to justify it. There's only two ways that I can see it, which is the theory you just said of where like he becomes like where like he becomes the father and he kind of takes over that role, or he visits Ahsoka as a Force ghost every now and then. And honestly, I think there's going to be a moment in the Dave Filoni movie where Ahsoka is there, Luke is there, and Leia is there, and they're having a conversation or something like after the big battle or something, and then Anakin shows up. And then that would be like the big moment of where it's like, oh my gosh, it's all the generations. This is crazy. Like,
I really wonder if they're going to have to talk to Anakin rather than Luke to have a good conversation.
Seeing that in live action is going to be nuts. Like of Luke talking to Anakin would just be crazy. But I also, yeah. Of seeing that on screen would just be crazy. But something else that I would love to see is Ahsoka and Luke and Leia talk about Anakin in like the old days of the Clone Wars, and like now that she's kind of out of that depression mode of where she was kind of holding in the guilt of everything that happened. I think we're gonna see more of the Ahsoka that we're used to, and you kind of saw that side. You kind of see the side that we see in the Ahsoka show in Star Wars Rebels of where she's kind of more kind of fallen back into herself, and she's more quiet and not as fun and exciting as she was in the Clone Wars. But the last couple of minutes of this episode, to me, that was like, that is Ahsoka. That's the Ahsoka that we fell in love with back in 2008. Of just the way that Rosario Dawson just channeled that was incredible. And the way that Hayden, I keep saying it, but the way that Hayden channeled The Clone Wars version of Anakin in this was just fantastic. It was surreal. Just because of Matt Lanter did such an incredible job with that. And I just love the fact that I guarantee you that they had conversations of being like, Anakin would do this. And I know that Hayden went back and watched the Clone Wars as well to prep for Obi-Wan Kenobi and probably for Ahsoka. So, so much. Let's see. There's this comment. I was talking about this at some point today. Was Hera hearing the saber fight too? So not Jason having Force ability yet. So here's the answer to that is, in my opinion, is that there's a line from A New Hope. The Force is what gives a Jedi its power. It's an energy field that lives in all human beings, right? So the Force is, in everyone. So my thing is that yes, it could have been the planet, but I think that this is kind of hinting at you don't have to be Force sensitive like as Anakin and
I mean, we established that in the series, and I think that something that fans have always speculated is that the best pilots all are Force sensitive, whether that's Force sensitivity where you can command the Force, which is I would say is a Jedi or a Sith or someone like that, or being able to feel it to make fast time reactions like pilots. So, and if we're establishing that everyone has the Force, it's all used in different ways. I think that's a really cool factor. It's almost like everyone has like different powers, but they're used in different ways. So I think it's cool.
No, I can't wait to see where the next episode goes. It's going to be great. Mm-hmm. Before we go and say our farewells, we are going to be doing something called the Star Wars Thought of the Week. So here is this week's Star Wars Thought of the Week. Josh, if you were introducing someone to Star Wars, how would you begin their Star Wars journey? Like what movie would you start with and then kind of go? And the reason why I bring this up is because Chris is of my friend Chris is introducing his girlfriend to Star Wars pretty much for the first time. And he started with 4, 5, and 6, right?
Yeah.
But then he went back to Rogue One. And I was like, yes. I did the same eyebrow thing. I was like, what? So how would you start someone's journey?
I would just start at A New Hope. That's the key point. I know George Lucas wants it to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I do believe that it should start with our original trilogy.
Okay.
Yeah, try showing someone like the Phantom Menace and be like, "What's going on here? Like, are you following this? Like, are you following intergalactic trade routes and blockades? Like." And he'd be like, "What? What is happening?"
This is Star Wars. This is exactly
like, what is this? And then I feel like it gives you a good play point. Like, let's say you watch the first 3 movies, and then you watch maybe the prequels, and then you kind of can get the kind of vibe of what they like about it, what the series they like about it. They don't have to watch everything. It's like, what do you like about it? Oh, I really liked the original trilogy. Oh, okay, let's go watch Rogue One. This explains this. Or let's go watch Andor. This explains this. And that I feel like it gives options. I don't think there is really that much of an options for the sequel trilogy right now, but we'll get there someday.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, and tell me if you've heard this theory, is not theory of just kind of a way to watch Star Wars, is you watch episode 4 and 5, and then you get to, spoiler alert for anyone that has watched Star Wars, of the part of where Vader's like, "No, I am your father." After that moment, that's a big moment in Star Wars history, right? Then you don't watch 6 right away. You go back to 1, 2, and 3. You kind of do that journey.
That's so much effort.
And then you watch episode 6.
Yeah, no, that's so much effort. I wouldn't do it. I literally just movies and gauge how you like the series.
Well, there you go. Well, there you go. That is our Star Wars thought of the week. Thank you, everyone who is part of our Patreon. We love you all. Thank you for being part of the journey. Like, for forever, it feels like. We're also on YouTube. Star Wars Stuff Podcast. Please go subscribe. We have a fun announcement happening tomorrow, by the way, not just for YouTube, but for all of our channels, which is pretty big. You don't want to miss it. So just check it out tomorrow. Just saying. Instagram at Star Wars Stuff Podcast. Twitter. Well, X, sorry. At Stuff Pod. Threads, Star Wars Stuff Podcast. Check that out. Josh runs that. Again, we're on Patreon at Star Wars Stuff Podcast 2187. We got some great content on there. We're also on TikTok. Search Star Wars Stuff Podcast. We're our email, Star Wars Stuff Podcast at gmail.com. Email us, talk to us. We love to hear back from you guys, your feedback. We're also on Facebook, Star Wars Stuff Group, and Star Wars Stuff Podcast page. Please go on Apple Podcasts. Give us our review. We actually have been reading them. We are getting your feedback. And that also shows that you listen. So thank you so much for that. There's always room for improvement. Our website is StarWarsStuffPodcast.com. Check it out. We have pretty much everything that I'm talking about right now is on our website. There's a link tree that will take you to everything that we're talking about. We're also on Twitch, Star Wars Stuff Gaming. And that is all. Josh, do you have any closing thoughts for the audience?
May the Force be with you.
That is so breathtaking. What a quote. All right. May the Force be with you always.